is in the field of neurosciences. So the question is, why am I up here? First, because nutrition is my passion. I love nutrition, and I've really seen it work for a lot of people. Second, because I'm deeply concerned. I'm concerned because it said that millions of Americans die each year of preventable lifestyle diseases. Slightly more concerning to those of us in this room is the estimate that we're looking at the first generations of Americans to have shorter life expectancies than both their parents and grandparents. But most of all, I'm here because of us, because I believe in us. I believe that we can and we do change what's possible each and every day. But to do so, we need information. So that's what I'm going to do today, is to give you a set of information that I believe to be both vitally important and potentially life-saving. Let me tell you how this all started. So I started college at Charleston in 2008. I was a bright young freshman, doing well in classes, making great friends, until college kind of caught up to me. Started having anxiety attacks, which led me to be quite depressed. And it was evident that I was gaining weight. Started to look a bit too much like Santa Claus. Became the fat fraternity brother. And can anyone find me in this picture of my senior year? That's me at the end. 80 pounds overweight, failing multiple classes, and losing hope pretty quick. So at this point, I knew I had to do something. So I asked a well-intentioned fraternity brother who informed me, bro, it's the carbs. Cut the carbs, up the protein, and you can lose the weight. So that's exactly what I did. For breakfast, I would have bacon and eggs. For lunch, chicken and broccoli. Come on in. For dinner, chicken and broccoli, and a lot of chicken and broccoli. Not only that, but I would wait until midnight before I attempted to go exercise, because I was not in the best shape and I didn't want to be mocked while I struggled to run 10 feet. 6 months later, here I am. Lost all the weight, actually in better shape than before. Went back to school and got a job at the greatest institution in the world with the best lab. And I decided, why stop there? Come on, I guess, that's good. Why stop there? Why not become that guy I was always a little jealous of? Why not go paleo and bulk up? So I did. Right swipe. So then, but best of all, one sunny Sunday afternoon, I found this gorgeous woman at a farmer's market. So this may sound like a success story, when in many ways it is. The only issue is I was still always sick, constantly suffering from sinus infections, head colds, acne, and a bit depressed. So one day, as per normal, I went to the CVS Minute Clinic because, of course, I had a head cold. There, the doctor informed me that not only did I have an arrhythmia, but I had extremely elevated blood pressure in the upper 140s. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of this information, so I did what any responsible adult would do, and I went to a different doctor. Who told me that not only did I have the high blood pressure and the arrhythmia, but my cholesterol was quite elevated as well. So here I am at 26 years old in what appears to be decent shape, with symptoms of heart disease. So this didn't seem right to me, and I started asking questions like, why do I have heart disease symptoms in a six-pack? And by the way, who else has heart disease? Would anyone like to guess what number of Americans lose their life to heart disease each year? 400,000. Right, about 400,000, making it America's #1 killer for the past several decades. Today alone, nearly 3,000 Americans will suffer a heart attack, roughly that of the individuals who lost their life in 9/11. Now I bring this up because statistically, if nothing is done, about 40% of the people in this room will die of heart disease. More than any other injury or ailment, including cancer. Heart disease claims 8 times more women than breast cancer. The question is, at what age should we start being concerned, right? So I'd argue, off this study, we should be concerned now, because they examined the hearts of nearly 300 American soldiers who lost their life in the Korean War. Surprisingly, up to 80% of them showed signs of atherosclerosis. Some of them had arteries that were blocked, up to 90%. Now these are young, healthy men in the prime of their lives with no previous health diagnoses. So who's to blame? Suspect number 1, cholesterol. Now cholesterol is synthesized in the liver, and we can also get it from food. I advise against that. but it's actually quite integral to healthy cells. That is a key component of the membrane that surrounds our cells. And it's actually required for those hormones we all know, testosterone and estrogen. Now, when we hear cholesterol, I think the first thing that comes to mind often is good cholesterol versus bad cholesterol. All right, so what does that mean? Cholesterol is transported in the blood as lipoproteins, which are classified by their density. So LDL, or your bad cholesterol, is low density lipoprotein. And as we see here, it has a far greater concentration of cholesterol and a little bit of protein. It functions to deposit that cholesterol. Compare that to HDL, or our good cholesterol, high density lipoprotein. And we see that it has less cholesterol, a bit more protein, and functions to collect that cholesterol at the tissues. So, how much dietary cholesterol is too much? Technically any, because the Institute of Medicine Food and Nutrition Board came out saying, you know what, there's not much evidence at all to support any need for dietary cholesterol. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that whenever we eat cholesterol-containing foods, our LDL tends to rise. Therefore, they couldn't set a safe upper intake level because any incremental increase may increase your chances of heart disease. So let's go through one day of healthy eating to see just how cholesterol stacks up. For breakfast, we have one hard-boiled egg, not fried, just one, about 200 milligrams. For lunch, we have a small grilled chicken breast about the size of our hand, another 120. Now for dinner, we have a nice salmon fillet with my good friend broccoli. That's going to be another 150. So at the end of the day, consuming just 3 food items that most of us consider to be quite helpful, we see that we're 2.5 times over previous cholesterol recommendations. I mentioned a term that some of you may not know, atherosclerosis. So what is it? Well, it's a progressive inflammatory disease, which is the buildup of cholesterol, fats, and other substances in the artery wall. How does it form? Well, let me draw it out for you. Be honest, none of you thought I was literally going to draw it out for you. So I was not an art major by any means, and here we see a partially well-drawn artery. It has an outer layer, a middle muscular layer, and this innermost layer known as the endothelium. Now the endothelium is only one cell layer thick, which makes it susceptible to damage from irritants. These irritants can be things like cigarette smoke, but this is a smoke-free campus, none of us do that here. They can also be things like chronically elevated blood pressure or elevated LDL cholesterol, which, as we just saw, is not hard to accomplish. Now these irritants, they go on to damage the endothelium, allowing cholesterol to deposit in your artery wall. This cholesterol then oxidizes or changes and sends out little signals to call in immune cells. The immune cells that respond are known as monocytes, and they're quite happy to help. They convert into macrophages, meaning a large cell that eats things. These macrophages then consume as much of that oxidized cholesterol as possible. In fact, they care about you so much that they die doing so, forming foam cells. Called foam cells, cut them in half, they literally look like they're full of fatty foam. Now by this time, we have this large mass of oxidized cholesterol, foam cells, other substances like fats that's been hardening or calcifying. Your body knows that that shouldn't be there, so it does everything it can to contain it. The muscular layer forms this nice fibrous protein cap. But by this time, we see that we have a significantly narrowed lumen, or area in which blood flows through. You guys are going to remember those drawings. I would argue that most of us already have this disease forming within our own bodies, because when you examine accidental death victims, by age 15, nearly all Americans show signs of atherosclerosis. There's even evidence to suggest that it begins before birth, because mothers with elevated LDL cholesterol have shown to have fetuses with arterial lesions, about step 2 we saw before. So if atherosclerosis, the point is that heart disease starts decades before the first sign or symptom, which can often be a heart attack, which can often be fatal. Now if atherosclerosis begins in childhood, shouldn't prevention begin there as well? And by the way, what is a good form of prevention? Can nutrition and lifestyle change alone prevent our #1 killer? Well, Dr. Dean Ornish sought to find out. He took 48 angiographically or medically confirmed heart disease patients and put some of them on a 1-year lifestyle change. Now, the biggest component of this lifestyle change was a 90% whole food, plant-based diet. No caloric restrictions. These individuals could eat as much fruits and vegetables and legumes as they possibly wanted. Practice a little stress management like relaxation, and light exercise a couple times a week. Nothing like CrossFit, just light walking. In just 1 year, nutrition and lifestyle change alone, with no medications, was shown to prevent, arrest, and reverse our #1 killer. This was not published yesterday. It was actually published about 30 years ago in one of our top medical journals, JAMA. These individuals literally had arteries that opened back up. While 4% may not seem like a lot, when you compare it to the control group, who had an 8% increase in arterial stenosis, we see again that nutrition and lifestyle change arrested the disease, prevented it from progressing, and then actually reversed it. Combine this with a little medication, some statins, and we see the highest reversal rate to date. Now, when I found these studies, I had a mix of emotions, because in my hands I held the instructions to reverse my own symptoms, but at the same time I was 26 years old and had never ate salad. But I decided, why not? I'll give it a try. So in just 1 year of progressively eating more and more whole plant foods, I was able to drop my cholesterol over 40 points. My blood pressure over 40 points. Arrhythmia disappeared. Cholesterol back to ideal. So if this diet has been shown to reverse our #1 killer, and it still is, then what are we eating? Well, we're eating the standard American diet, or SAD. I'm going to let that acronym set in for just a moment. What is it? It's primarily processed food. Over 60% of our calories. It's very heavy in animal products, about a quarter of our calories, things from like meat and dairy, and just over 10% from plants. Now this is frustrating when you realize that this 12% includes both apples and pies and almonds and candy bars. I'm sorry friends, but a Snickers is not a salad. How bad is it? Anyone like to guess what percent of US adults eat a single piece of fruit in any given day? About 25%. Correct. This is a really one-sided conversation. So 75% of US adults consume no fruit in a given day. 90% don't eat enough vegetables, 99% don't have enough whole grains, and 95% of us exceed our discretionary junk food calories, which can be up to a quarter. So what are our cancer rates on this current diet? Would anyone like to guess what percentage of men statistically will develop cancer in their lifetime? Those are good guesses. It's actually just over 40%. About a quarter of men will die of cancer, the most prevalent being prostate. Ladies, do you do better or worse? Ooh, you actually do better. Only 1 in 3 women will develop cancer in their lifetimes. About 20% will die of it, most prevalent being breast. I just want to take a minute to let you know that by no means has it always been this way. Just over 100 years ago, we were concerned because cancer rates were doubling from in the 30s to in the 60s per 1,000. Nothing like the 1 in 5 we see today. So the question is, could there be a link between our current cancer rates and our current diet? Professor Colin Campbell would argue that there most certainly is. Now, he was doing some work in the Philippines trying to get more protein into malnourished children's diets. To do so, he was using peanuts. But the problem is that the peanuts in this case were going to mold, producing a carcinogen known as aflatoxin. This carcinogen known to promote liver cancer in children. Surprisingly, it was actually the more affluent children, or the children consuming more protein or animal products, that were getting more of the cancer. This is not what you would expect. And it's not what I expected, nor what Campbell expected. Now, about this time, he found a study out of India showing very similar things in rodents. As any good scientist would do, he went back to the lab to replicate it. So he gave all rats the equal dosing of the carcinogen, or the suspect cancer agent. Half the rats got a high animal protein diet, 20% or more casein. Now, casein is the protein most abundant in milk. The other half got just 5%, or a low protein diet. The results were something that we practically never see in science, an all or none effect. all of the rats on the high animal protein diet got the liver cancer or the precancerous lesions, whereas none of the rats on the low animal protein diet even got the lesions. Now I want you to keep in mind that this is a replicated study that Campbell then replicated multiple times with multiple carcinogens in multiple animal models, all to attain strikingly similar results. Is protein itself a problem? No, because Campbell also tested soy and gluten, those plant-based proteins that we tend to fear. Neither fostered the cancer growth, even at the higher levels. This is because when you eat a food, generally we're not just getting one macronutrient, we're getting a package deal. We consume things like steak, we get cholesterol, which is associated with heart disease, and elevated levels of IGF-1, a growth hormone, associated with prostate, breast, and colorectal cancer. Whereas when we consume plants, we get things like fiber, which is protective against digestive cancers, and phytonutrients, which have shown a broad beneficial effect. So none of us are a rat here, so what does that really mean for us? Well, when we look at a nationally representative survey, we see strikingly similar things in humans. Humans consuming a high animal protein diet, 20% or more, just like the rats, just after midlife, over the next 2 decades, have a 75% increase in overall mortality, 4 times the cancer deaths, and 5 times the deaths from diabetes, primarily type 2 complications. Again, the statistics do not hold if the protein is plant-derived, which sounds familiar to me. So what's the similarity between the only shampoo I thought there was growing up, American Cookouts, a friend of mine from college, breakfast, well, we all got to prevent tears, and one of our favorite late night snacks. Anyone? They all contain carcinogens. Yes, each one of these items contains a class 1 carcinogen. Things known to promote cancer growth in humans. Things like plutonium in cigarette smoke. Now, we're not watching What the Health. This isn't some type of hippie propaganda. You can find this list at cancer.org. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Now, at least these 2 companies cared enough to correct the problem. Again, we see that we're consuming a tremendous amount of animal protein, seeing a lot of cancer. It could just be coincidence. This is the first question I always get when I bring up plant-based diets. Justin, where do you get your protein? I don't judge people for this question. You know, it's an artifact of our society. We're taught that you have to get protein because we've elevated protein to be the deity of macronutrients. Let's talk about protein for a second. Protein was discovered in 1840 by a Dutch chemist who named it after the Greek word proteus, meaning of prime importance. Now, when you're taught you are what you eat, why would you not want to be of prime importance? Well, what is a protein? Does anyone know what you call an acid with an attitude problem? Amino acid. Here we see the building blocks of proteins. Didn't like that one. And it contains this amino group and an acidic group, or amino acid. These amino acids combine into chains known as peptides, which then fold in on themselves due to electrostatic forces, forming the complex proteins that make life possible. How many of these amino acids do we need? About 20. 9 of them are known as essential amino acids because they must come from our diet. Where do we find them in our diet? Here. Here's where we all get our protein, from plants. Because only plants have the ability to pull that nitrogen from the air and fix it into those amino acids we just saw. So much so that when you consume animal protein, you're really just getting recycled, repackaged plant protein. Think about it for a moment. We're taught that we need to consume cows because they have big muscles, so that we can form big muscles. But what did the cow eat to form the big muscles? There we go. I think it doesn't hold up. So how much protein do you need? You need about 0.83 grams per kilogram per day. When we do the math, we see that a 165-pound male like myself needs just over 60 grams of protein. So where can we find this amount of protein? In this 1 can of garbanzo beans and 1 block of tempeh, containing about 60 grams. Both of these items are organic. Combined will set you back about $3, which is quite a good deal. If that's all you ate in a day, you'd be pretty hungry, but you would get enough protein. Which brings me to my point. The same way we prevent protein deficiency is the way we prevent starvation. Eat enough, eat a wide variety of whole plant foods. I assure you, you will be just fine. Some of you came into this room and you are not concerned about heart disease or cancer, but you may be concerned about your mood or your weight or your complexion. If you're part of over 50% of the population, and things like acne and diabetes can severely complicate life. Let's talk about depression for a moment. Now, depression is something that should always be taken seriously, because at times, unfortunately, it can lead to suicide, which is our 13th leading killer, claiming 41,000 lives per year, roughly that of breast cancer. This year alone, over 13 million Americans may suffer from depression, a large portion being students. If you're suffering, please let someone know. We have excellent services. Now, is there a diet associated with a healthier mood? Turns out there may be, because when you compare omnivores and vegetarians on their profile of mood states and depression and anxiety scores, we see that vegetarians not only experience significantly less negative moods, they report a better mood overall and experience more vigor, indicating that yes, a plant-based diet is associated with a healthier mood. What about an omnivorous diet, one containing meat? Well, it could be detrimental because omnivorous diets contain chicken and eggs, which are a source of arachidonic acid, which is a pro-inflammatory acid. They have about 9 times. This is an issue because it is associated with both major depression and suicide risk. If you remove all the flesh foods from an omnivore's diet for just 2 weeks, we see a significant improvement in mood states, indicating again that yes, for those of us with a propensity towards depression, a plant-based diet may be quite protective. So why do we get depressed? Well, leading theory is the monoamine theory that states that depression arises as a chemical imbalance in the brain. These chemicals being neurotransmitters, the ones we're all familiar with, serotonin and dopamine. Okay? So one neuron will release its neurotransmitters and it will cross this area between the two, known as the synaptic cleft, and bind to the next one, exerting its effect. So these don't stay in that cleft forever. They can be taken back up, or they can be degraded within the synapse. The primary lowering process is thought to be an enzyme known as monoamine oxidase, which kind of chews up those neurotransmitters. Depressed individuals have shown to have about 30% more of this enzyme in its activity in all major brain regions examined. So you may have more of something, crunching up more of your neurotransmitters, maybe leading to a chemical imbalance. The good news is, nature might have provided us a solution. Plants. Plants like apples and berries and teas contain phytonutrients, which have been shown to inhibit monoamine oxidase to a certain extent. At the population level, those consuming those consuming 8 or more servings of fruits and vegetables a day have about 62% less depression odds. Switch to a big problem we face, obesity. Would anyone like to guess what percentage of US adults are not just overweight, but obese?
1 out of 3.
That's a great guess. Dead on. So when we combine in being overweight, we see that nearly 70% of the adult US population struggles with a weight issue. Unfortunately, obesity is most prevalent in minorities. Now, when 70% of our population suffers from a weight issue, and we see 50% of any population suffering from a severe weight issue, we should start asking questions like, when did this happen and why? Here's about the time I was born. And we see that 10% of our population, roughly, is obese. This is not just overweight, this is obesity. Fast forward 10 years, 20%. 10 more years, 30%. Currently, we see states here in purple, the purple indicating that 35% or more of that state's adult population is obese. If we don't do anything, what will it look like in a few more years? Here's my estimate. No one laughs at that, right? So, the problem with obesity is that it's unsustainable no matter how you look at it. In terms of our healthcare system, the cost of obesity doubled from 70 billion to nearly 150 billion in just 1 decade. We do not have the means to sustain this. If you are obese, you may have to spend up to $1,400 more per year in medical costs alone. Now, obesity is something that should never be judged, but should always be addressed, because scientifically, it may result in a shorter lifespan with more health problems. The good news is, it's not necessarily a life sentence. Obesity can be a temporary and treatable condition. Take it from me, who's been on both sides. The grass is not only greener, it tastes good, and it has protein. So what is a good treatment for obesity? Plants. Because the plant-based diet has been shown to work. In just under 2 weeks, you can lose up to 5 pounds. In a month, 10 pounds. In a year, up to 24 pounds. Now, we see here from the Seventh-day Adventists that those consuming less meat and more fruits and vegetables actually have a lower BMI or body mass. When you look at this figure, I don't want you to think that this is a standard American here, eating meat every day, sometimes a couple times a day. Because it's not. This study was done in the Seventh-day Adventists, which are a nutritional researcher's dream come true. It's a well-organized group of people that don't smoke, don't drink, have excellent familial and religious support, and tend to sustain from flesh foods because they view their body as a temple. So this is someone only eating meat 2 to 3 times a week, and still we see this effect. Now, why do we get obese? When I was obese, I was told, Justin, you eat too much and you exercise too little, which is a behavioral explanation, which allows the individual like myself to be labeled both a glutton and a slob, which puts the blame on the individual and off of the system or the food. This is not the reality. The reality is that we're living in a toxic environment, a plague of processed food. So we're eating foods which are void of fiber, so we never get full, we're always hungry, we have to keep eating, but we're eating foods which have no nutrients and are high in sugar and calories, leaving us in a state we've never really seen before, both obese and malnourished, resulting in a hormonal imbalance that causes us to eat too much and exercise too little. So let's quit blaming ourselves. It's been the food all along. What is a good way to fix this biology? Fiber. Because people tend to eat the same bulk of food in a meal, regardless of the caloric content. Now this is because our stomachs don't necessarily contain calorie receptors. What they do contain are stretch receptors of sorts. When you eat a bulk of fibrous plant foods, you can stretch out that stomach for far lower calories, activating that stretch receptor to send a signal to the brain saying, I'm full. So you do this a couple times a day and you're still under the calories they tell you to eat. Where does that fiber come from? Here we see an animal cell compared to a plant cell. A key difference I want you to take note of is this presence of a cell wall. So this cell wall is composed of complex carbohydrates we know as fiber. Compare that to an animal cell membrane, and we see that it contains cholesterol. So from plants, we get fiber, which fills us up and is protective against cancers. And from animals, we get cholesterol, which is associated with heart disease. Just leave that there for a moment. This is a question I get a lot. Bro, where do you get your macros? What's the ideal ratio? Well, the World Health Organization and Institute of Medicine agree that we should get about 10 to 20% of our calories from protein. You can get it from plants. Up to 30% of our calories from fats, and up to 75% of our calories from carbohydrates. Those things we're all taught to avoid, which is a confusing and conflicting message. Where do we find these exact ratios? Plants, right here. What a bizarre concept. The foods we evolved eating, even during the Paleolithic era, having the exact macronutrient ratios that we need. Let's talk about diabetes for a moment, because diabetes affects over 20 million Americans. Primarily type 2, which I would argue is not purely genetic, because we're seeing 3 times more than we did just 3 decades ago. There's about 1 million new cases each year. The problem with this is almost half are children. Now when a child gets type 2 diabetes, you can take about 15 to 20 years off their life expectancy. No parent would want this. Again, if we continue on our current diet, it's estimated that 1/3 of the people in this room may be diabetic by mid-century. John, you got a good balance, buddy? Over here for a second. This is why we should be concerned about type 2 diabetes. It is, you stand on one leg for me?
Yeah.
Number one cause of lower limb amputations, close your eyes. Number one cause of blindness, you can sit back down, your kidneys failed. Number one cause of kidney failure. All right, it's a serious disease. We don't want to joke about it and call it dean. Now, I think we have this conception in our society that type 2 diabetes is due purely to consuming too much sugar. Well, is that true? This figure would suggest that it may not be the whole story, because we see that we're actually consuming less sweeteners. Our obesity rates are climbing, we're consuming more saturated fat, we're actually seeing a rise in type 2 diabetes, we're eating more chicken, and again from our Seventh-day Adventist, we see that those restricting their meat and eating more fruits and vegetables cut their chances of type 2 diabetes in half. The individuals in this study eliminating 80% of their odds. It's all correlation, but if there's enough smoke, maybe leave the room. We see from European individuals, over 16,000, that meat consumption actually is associated with type 2 diabetes. Because just 50 grams of unprocessed meat consumed may increase your chances by up to 8%. If that meat is processed, as in hot dogs and hamburgers and chicken nuggets, that number goes up to 12%. Now 12% may not seem like a huge rise, but when we realize that 50 grams is found in these 2 chicken nuggets this child is about to eat, we tend to be concerned. Now it's thought to be the saturated fat in this meat that is responsible, because a single high-fat meal can impair glucose absorption or raise your blood sugar in under 3 hours. Now what if we did this day after day, year after year? But this won't happen to us because we eat lean meat, like chicken. Well, this may have been true over 100 years ago because a single serving of chicken was quite lean. It only had about 2 grams of fat. Today we're eating these large freakish mammoths here. Same serving of chicken, 23 grams of fat. Up to 10 times more than previously. So what's the result of eating this obesity? Is it obesity? Is it type 2 diabetes? I hope we find out. What about milk? We don't consume whole milk, we're healthy. We consume 2% or low-fat milk. Now when you see this in a grocery store, you're seeing a nutrition label given in percent by weight, which is tremendously sneaky in this scenario because 89% of that weight is water. Yeah, it has 2 grams of fat, so you can call it 2% milk. But if we redid it metabolically, we would see a much different picture. We did it by percent calories. We see that we're actually getting more calories from fat from this milk than we are from protein. So we could relabel it 35% fat milk, which sounds delicious. Now, in a randomized clinical trial, we saw that a plant-based diet does very well in managing diabetes symptoms, even compared with the American Diabetes Association criteria diet. We saw that those eating plant-based actually were able to reduce their medications in a greater proportion. They had better blood sugar control, lost more weight, and were able to lower their LDL cholesterol a good bit more. All right? Now, my question is, why don't we choose the diet that reduces both risk factors? Both refined sugars, because absolutely lower your sugar, but also eliminate saturated fat. Because those eating plant-based have better insulin sensitivity, better insulin levels, and better blood sugar control. When I bring this up, I get, Justin, we need more data. Of course we need more data. That's not really a valid question. The question is, why are we getting more data? Because in this case, the data is not a rat pressing a lever. It's human lives. It's their limbs, their kidneys, and their vision. So by all means, let's get more data. What about asthma? Now, asthma can severely complicate life, as it was for these individuals. Over half of them had been hospitalized recently. They were taking over 4 medications. Put them on a 1-year vegan regime or plant-based diet. As a side note, this is the only study I found that mentioned pesticide-free plant foods. So if you can buy organic, wonderful, do so. But if you can't, just buy more plant foods, and you'll still see those results. Now, in just 4 months, these individuals saw a 70% improvement. Over the course of a year, over a 90% improvement. Less asthma attacks, less severe attacks, better lung capacity, decreased blood pressure, and annoying ailments like arthritis tended to get a little bit better. So an asthma management plan is key, in which I would argue a plant-based diet might be a good one. Now, I have two wonderful mothers, two very intelligent, beautiful sisters, and one phenomenal girlfriend. And I've seen that menstruation at times can be painful, as it was for these ladies. Now, Dr. Barnard put them on a 2-month or 2-cycle plant-based diet. In just that short period of time, they lost about 6 pounds. Painful menstruation days decreased from 4 to 3. When one day may not seem like a lot, when you're hunched over in pain, pounding chocolate ice cream, it may be. They also had better premenstrual symptoms, like decreased abdominal pain and bloating, better concentration. The women liked this diet so much that they refused to return to their previous diet to complete the crossover design. Let's take a moment to talk about poop, because it's actually a very important topic, because digestive cancers are our 5th leading killer. And we see at a population level that those consuming twice as much fiber, or pooping twice as much, have 3 times less cancer. As you release about 1 pound a day, your chances diminish significantly. It's accomplished by eating more plant foods. Constipation should always be taken seriously because it's been shown to result in genetic or DNA changes. How does this happen? Well, here we see a human digestive tract. It's quite twisty and turny and contains this phenomenal lining, the cells held together by tight junctions. The issue is, when we consume an American diet void of fiber and high in animal proteins, our feces gets stuck here in our sigmoid colon at times. This is an issue because meat contains these little fragments of dead bacteria known as endotoxins. These endotoxins over time can punch through those tight junctions, allowing things into your bloodstream that should never be there. You can't kill them from cooking because, again, they're fragments of dead bacteria. Now, I worked in dermatology for a little while as a medical assistant, and I saw that acne affects most people, even into adulthood. During my time there, I never saw anything work quite as well in treating acne as removing dairy from the diet. I didn't know why at the time, and I myself consumed dairy. But these studies propose an interesting theory. The theory is that dairy consumption increases your circulating sex hormones because it's from a lactating cow. Now, these increased sex hormones then increase the production of sebum, or skin oil. This skin oil then attracts bacteria because it's quite nourishing to them that colonize our pores, resulting in inflammation we know as zits. It may not be such a coincidence that what comes out of here looks strikingly like that. Now, a plant-based diet is different than those expensive creams have been dying because they attack acne from the inside. So this is what I get a lot of the time. Justin, you got a good argument, you present good data, but you don't understand. I can never be vegetarian or vegan. To which I say, that's fine, don't. Because a vegetarian diet still contains dairy, our #1 source of saturated fats. And eggs are our #1 source of dietary cholesterol. Vegans, I love you, but all a vegan tells me is what they're not eating. They're not consuming animal products. It doesn't mean they're eating whole plant foods. Because Oreos are vegan, definitely really processed, definitely not healthy. In fact, it's debatable whether or not that last 10% increase, going from 90% to 100% plant-based, will really result in any increase in longevity or decrease in disease states. So never let perfect be the enemy of good. Take every step you can in the right direction. Just keep eating more and more whole plant foods. Focus on what you can have, not what you can't have. And what you can have is a healthy, well-nourished, well-functioning body. So what's the point of all this? The point is that these studies we've examined today, and many, many more, indicate that you know what? You may not have to die of heart disease. That things like type 2 diabetes, obesity, and dementia may not be just inevitable consequences of aging. And because these diseases are crippling our individuals, overburdening our medical system, and leading to the destruction of our environment, we see that a whole food, plant-based diet is the only sustainable diet for humanity at this time. Thank you all very much. Woo!